Hi, everybody. I'm Brittany Lewis, a breaking news reporter here at Forbes. Joining me once again is my colleague, Forbes staff writer Zach Everson. Zach, thanks so much for joining me.
Thanks for bringing me back to once again talk about campaign contributions.
Of course, and exactly how they connect to what we saw in Venezuela, that operation conducted by U.S. forces that resulted in the capture of the country's sitting leader, Nicolas Maduro. He's currently in New York City, where he faces narco-terrorism, drug, and weapons charges. President Trump said the goal of that operation, though, was to bring, quote, outlaw dictator Nicolas Maduro to justice. But some have been quick to criticize him for that, saying that the motivation doesn't really seem like it's about drugs, but rather oil, especially given that President Trump said after the raid that the United States is going to be heavily involved in Venezuela's oil industry. After the story broke, you're reporting this. The oil and gas industry spent $250 million on elections that produced the current U.S. government. I want to talk exactly where that money was spent, though. Let's first talk party. Did the oil and gas industry pour more money into Republicans or Democrats?
Oh yeah, the oil and gas industry certainly had a favorite, and that would be Republicans. This data is all from Open Secrets. According to their calculations, Republican candidates got 88% of the industry's support.
That's huge. Is there any indication to why? Tell us about that.
I reached out to all of the oil and gas companies that we looked at in this article. I didn't get any answers that would have explained that at all. In some cases, maybe it makes sense that the lawmakers are in states that are really driven, economies driven by oil. So, for example, Ted Cruz was the biggest recipient in Congress with over $1 million. He's also from Texas, so it's not that surprising that they would want to give money to somebody in that state. But, I was surprised to see that it was an 88 to 12% split. Did seem a little bit egregious.
I mean, that's just huge. So then when you're looking at the top of the ticket back in 2024, obviously it was Trump versus Harris. President Trump, obviously the Republican nominee. I'm assuming based on that math, he received a lot more of that spending. Talk to us about it.
Yeah, so he received about $2.6 million, whereas Biden and then Harris received $1.4 million. So again, pretty sizable difference there. Not a ton of money in the overall picture of things. If you factor in Elon Musk, spent 250 million. Tim Allen spent hundreds of millions. They're different. They're 2.6 to 1.4 isn't going to make a huge difference in an election, but it does kind of show you who they support.
And when you're moving down the ballot, I know you mentioned Senator Ted Cruz of Texas. He got a lot of support from the oil and gas industry. But how much was spent on congressional races? And who were some of the other candidates that benefited the most?
Well, the top 9 beneficiaries in congressional races were all Republicans. And what I also found interesting, whereas Cruz, Texas makes sense, his counterpart in the Senate from Texas, John Cornyn, was not amongst those top 9 people. So, you have 2 from Louisiana, Mike Johnson, not surprising given that he's now speaker, North Dakota, Wyoming. You've got some fracking states there as well that were well represented. First Democrat on the list comes in as Colin Allred, who is also Texas.
And then when you're looking at this and comparing this spending from 2024 to 2020, how exactly does that compare?
It was a 66% increase from 2020. So, we didn't look at 2022 since that was an off-year election for the president. Obviously, they're going to spend more money when there is a presidential election. But it was, it seemed like a pretty decent jump there of 66%.
I want to read another tidbit from your reporting. This is what you wrote. Separately, the industry spent an additional $154 million on federal lobbying for roughly 200 clients in 2023 and 2024. Now, as we sit here in 2026, do you think, or do these companies think, does the oil industry think that this investment paid off for them?
I would imagine they think it's a good investment. Oil companies are in the business of making money, and they wouldn't drop $154 million on something if they didn't think it was going to be worthwhile. As for whether they still think that's the case, I don't have tallies in front of me, but I can tell you that oil and gas companies have not stopped lobbying after that. So, they certainly view that as the cost of doing business, as do many other industries.
And did this money appear to influence at all the administration's actions when it comes to Venezuela, when it comes to Maduro's ouster, or President Trump's interest in getting the United States really heavily involved in rebuilding Venezuela's oil industry?
That's it. We don't know. It's not clear if it mattered, to what extent, whether any of this. And that's part of the issue with money in politics. You can't say definitively if the money is what drove a decision a lot of the time. Sometimes it can be a little bit clear cut, and those are wonderful examples if you're a reporter and you're able to find those. But a lot of times it's just you see the money and then you see an action later, and connecting them is definitive, one led to the other. Not quite sure.
I mean, there's always a question, or there's always that statement rather, money talks. Does it appear, though, I know you can't link it from definitive, but does it appear that money nudged anything in the direction here?
Donald Trump likes money. And people who, are donating to his campaign and his affiliated committees and are spending money at Trump properties and buying his meme coin and buying his token and buying his stable coin and buying his beer pong set that you can see behind me are often doing it, not in my case, because they want to curry favor with Donald Trump. So, whether that actually does work or not, I don't think it was the fact that he did attack Venezuela doesn't sound like it's totally out of left field given what his platform has been over the past year.
And ever since that attack, that operation, there have been comparisons to Iraq. And President Trump, he apparently spoke to MSNBC's Joe Scarborough, and he said that the difference here is America is going to be keeping the oil. Bush didn't. We're keeping the oil. President Trump has not been shy about talking about oil and the United States' involvement in the oil industry. He said this: we're going to be rebuilding and we're not spending money. The oil companies are spending money. As of now, there's only one American oil company operating in Venezuela. Remains to be seen if others are going to go back in. Are U.S. oil giants chomping at the bit right now to return to Venezuela? What's your take on that?
They're a little nervous. They don't know exactly how it's going to play out. Obviously, companies do not want to irritate Donald Trump, but and they want to make money. But on the other hand, is this going to be a good play for them in the long term? Sure, maybe they'll get into Venezuela and they'll get some oil now. But, I've heard that some of them are concerned about investing a lot of money there. And all of a sudden we have, different president in the United States and their investment just goes up. So, when I talked to ConocoPhillips spokesperson, he said they're, still evaluating, waiting to hear, in not jumping in anything yet.
I've talked to politicians, both Republicans and Democrats, since Maduro was captured and brought to the United States, and the reaction has been really mixed. Some have been excited that he's now out of power, others concerned about exactly what's next. I'm curious, how exactly did the oil and gas stocks react to this news?
They viewed it as good news, at least on that first day where we saw Chevron, which is, as you mentioned, the only major U.S. company currently permitted to pump and export oil there, was up 5%. ExxonMobil 2.2, which brought it to a 52-week high. ConocoPhillips also went up, and it also was oil, not just oil companies, but oil field service companies also did really well. SLB was up 8.9%. Halliburton was about 8%. So the market certainly thinks this is good for them.
And obviously, this story, you're looking at the money aspect here, the money angle. What exactly are you looking out for next? What money trail are you going to be following?
Two things. One of which I mentioned in the article itself is we will see around January 31st when campaigns have to report their latest financials to the FEC. We'll see who might have given money in the run-up to Venezuela. These stats are all from previous, so it'll be interesting to see what happened right before that. The other thing, which I didn't mention in here, but we've talked about it previously, stock. I am very interested to see which lawmakers traded stocks that might be influenced by the actions in Venezuela. They have 45 days to report that information. A lot of times they do it earlier, a lot of times they do it later. So it's going to be interesting to see what's coming in there and if anybody was trading defense industry stocks or oil and gas stocks.
So I think that sounds like you and I probably have plenty of conversations in store for us in 2026. Zach, I always appreciate it. Thanks for coming on.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.